Very good reading. All right, we're going to actually record all the Sunday school lessons. I wish I had done it for Ruth, and I wish I did it for James. But my parents want to see the lessons. Also, there's some people who can't always get to Sunday school. I want them to be able to go and listen to the lessons so that when they come on Friday night, they actually know what we're talking about and they can be right up to speed with us, and they can do it at their own time. So if you guys want, I'm going to post all of the teachings on The More Earnest Heed. That's my YouTube channel. You can go on there, The More Earnest Heed, if you want to write that down. That's what it looks like. And then we're going to do the best we can to if I have you guys teach and you don't want yourself recorded, you don't want yourself on the internet, obviously that's fine, but I would like to do everything we do in Sunday school class because, I know when I'm out of town, I want to hear whoever's going to be teaching. So let's jump right into it. And Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 1, the Bible reads, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." The heaven and the earth. So God, in day one, created our dwelling place, and he created his dwelling place. You say, well, how come that's just not the heavens where the birds fly? Because number one, he creates it later on, we're going to see. But also, this is singular, it's not heavens. A lot of times when you see heavens mentioned in the book of Genesis, it's plural, because there's several heavens. There's heavens where birds fly, and then there's an outer atmosphere, and then, whatever above that. It's like there's an expanse, there's an open sky. The Bible says he spreadeth it out as a tent, to dwell in. So we're going to talk about the heavens later. But I kind of want to hit on some things. Now, this chapter is packed full. I told you guys Genesis, first book in the Bible, last book in the Bible, my two favorite books. Okay, so there's so much to teach on. I'm not going to hit on everything, but I want to hit some essential points and some essential questions that come up. So one of the biggest questions here is, you guys see, I have a new Bible that I brought to Sunday school. The reason I brought this Bible is because this is actually a Schofield reference Bible. I don't advocate for this. I'm not a huge fan. I'm not a fan at all of Schofield. And I brought this for a reason, because right in Genesis 1, if you guys have a Schofield reference Bible, you're going to see a subheading in between verse 1 and verse 2. And it's going to read, "Earth made waste and empty by judgment." Jeremiah 4:23 through 26. Because what happens is, when the writer Schofield was putting his notes in here, he introduced something called the gap theory. Have you guys ever heard of the gap theory? Okay, and basically there's a gap. What they're saying is there's a gap between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2, where after he creates the heaven and the earth, it says, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep." They believe that came because of judgment. In his notes, Schofield writes, Jeremiah 4:23 through 26 clearly indicate that the earth had undergone a cataclysmic change as a result of divine judgment. So basically they were being bad, God had to judge the earth and destroy it, and then recreate it into a new beginning. The face of the earth bears everywhere the marks of such a catastrophe. There are not wanting intimations would connect the previous testing and fall of angels. So what he believes happened is when the angels fell from heaven, we'll talk about that at a later time, maybe even in Genesis, where Lucifer and a third of the angels were cast out of heaven. They believe they occupied earth, and because of all the sin and because of all the wickedness, which, my first thing is, there was enough wickedness for them to be thrown out of heaven. Why does God then let them go to earth and then say there's too much wickedness there and then destroy the earth and then recreate it again? Right off the bat, just using logic, that never made good sense to me. So if you guys believe in a gap theory, it's okay. I'm not picking on you. I'm just going to show you very quickly, without spending a ton of time on it because it is exhaustive, 7 points on why I don't believe the gap theory. And we're actually going to use Schofield's reference that he went to. So let's everybody turn to Jeremiah chapter 4. Jeremiah chapter 4, and we're going to read verses 23 to 27. Jeremiah chapter 4, verses 23 to 7. While you're turning there, basically this is a quick synopsis of it. According to the gap theory, there's a very long gap of time between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. The world that existed during this gap was destroyed, and God recreated it in the 6th day described in Genesis. This idea fails because it lacks biblical support and puts death before sin, when Scripture describes death as the consequence for sin. Kristen, if you would, go to Romans 5:12 while we're all in Jeremiah chapter 4. Romans chapter 5, verse 12. While she's there, or while she's reading that, we're going to start reading in Jeremiah chapter 4. Let's look at verse 23. This is what a gap theorist will say is pointing back to that judgment. So they're saying God created the heaven where he dwells and the earth below, but then he had to destroy it, and it could have been millions of years. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to coincide it with science. The science will say, well, the earth is billions and billions and billions of years old. It changes every time, and they use different ways of measuring that. But one day it might be 65 billion, it might be 50 billion. And what they're saying is, oh, there's good reason for that, because it did exist for all those millions and billions of years. But then God had to destroy it and then recreate it into a new beginning. Okay, and we're going to see where that comes from and give it a fair run, a fair shake, and see if that holds water. So Jeremiah chapter 4 and verse 23, before we read, what does Romans 5:12 say, Kristen?
Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned.
So one of the reasons that the gap theory cannot be, it says, for as by one man sin entered into the world. Who is that one man? Adam, which was created on day 6. So if he created man on day 6, and that's how he was the first one that came and introduced sin into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for all have sinned, then it couldn't have been judged before because of sin, right? Because it was Adam who ushered in that sin. So that's number one false flag right there. But look at what their proof text is. According to Scofield, Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 23 reads, and I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void. Does that sound familiar? And the heavens, plural, and they had no light. And I beheld mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills were moved lightly. And I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all the birds of the heavens were fled. And I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord, and by his fierce anger. For thus hath the Lord said, the whole land shall be desolate, yet I will not make a full end. So here you have the vision of Jeremiah, and they believe that is past tense. That is showing that basically he's in the middle of talking about Israel, Judah, and Jerusalem. If you read the chapter, every single verse is about Jerusalem and Judah. But he's kind of taking a pause here to kind of go back to a dateless past and saying, oh yeah, by the way, there used to be a heaven and earth, but it was destroyed, and it was knocked down because of the fierce anger of the Lord, and he had to destroy it. And then he goes back to what he was talking about before. And I'm going to show you why it's not speaking of a past tense. Point number 1, and look at verse 24. It says, without form and void. And that's obviously a reference to Genesis chapter 2. It's different because look at this. It says, I beheld, in verse 24, the mountains. What does the word void mean? Empty. Where'd the mountains come from? So right off the bat, we see mountains where something was supposed to be void. Point number 2, verse 25, look what it says. And I beheld, and lo, there was no man, and all of the birds of the heavens fled. Guys, where was birds created? I left this up here as a reference. Day 5. Where did the birds come from? If they were created on day 5, we say, well, he recreated the birds. There used to be birds. But here's the thing. It's not that they were destroyed and God had to make them all over again. Look down at the verse and actually read it. It says, and all of the birds of the heavens were fled. Means they were there, and then they fled away. They went somewhere else. It's not that it was destroyed and they all went away. They just left. Like how birds migrate, to the south. Same thing. The birds just fled away. So then, point number 3 is look at verse 26. And I beheld, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord, and by his fierce anger. The cities were broken down. It's not that they were non-existent. It's not that they ceased to exist. There were cities, and they were broken down. Point number 4 that debunks the gap theory. Every verse of the chapter, virtually, is referring to Judah and Jerusalem, showing he's talking about a specific geographical place. Look at verse 1 of chapter 4. If thou wilt return, O Israel, Lord, with the Lord say unto me, and you keep going down, verse 2, verse 3, it says Judah and Jerusalem. Look at verse 4 in the middle of the verse. Jerusalem. Look at verse 5, middle of the verse. Jerusalem. Look at verse 6, Zion. Look at verse 7. Verse 10, Jerusalem. Look at verse 11, Jerusalem. Look at verse 14, Jerusalem. Look at verse 16, Jerusalem. So as you can see, almost virtually every single verse is speaking literally of the city of Jerusalem. So when it says the city was broken down and the birds flew away, that we're speaking of the city of Jerusalem, and we're not speaking of it in a past tense, we're speaking of it in a future tense. Look, point number 4 is the earth is talking about the dry land. Every time the Bible uses earth, it's not speaking of the planet. You know, the Bible talks about people putting earth on their head. Does it mean they're putting the entire planet on top of their head? No, what is also earth? It's also the land, right? It's also the physical dirt. So look at verse, where it says, verse 27, for thus hath the Lord said, the whole land shall be desolate, yet I will not make a full end. It's not speaking of the entire planet. It's speaking of that land, that Jerusalem being desolate. And we have in verse, where is it? I think it's verse 29, the whole city shall flee for the noise of the horsemen and the horsebows. So it's literally speaking of the land of the city. So we're speaking about a specific geographical location, not the entire planet being destroyed. Are you guys following me so far? Okay. Point number 6 that debunks the gap theory. Verse 29. Look at the wording. Pay very close attention to the, what's that? Point number 5 was the earth is talking about the dry land, not the entire planet. Okay. So it's just literally speaking the dry land, just like in verse, I believe it's 10 of Genesis 1, it says, let me give you, stay right there, don't go anywhere. Verse 10 of Genesis 1 says, and God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas, and God saw that it was good. Sometimes referring to as dry land. Here's a paper, guys. And sometimes it's referring to the dirt, and sometimes referring to the whole planet. So point number 6, look at verse 29. It says, watch the wording, the whole city shall flee. Is shall flee past tense or future tense? Thank you. For the noise of the horsemen and the bowmen, they shall go, past tense or future tense? Future. Onto the thickets and climb up upon the rocks. Every city shall be, future or past, forsaken, and not a man shall dwell therein. So guys, this is clearly speaking of something in the future. Jeremiah is prophesying about something that's going to happen to specifically the city of Jerusalem in the future. It has nothing to do with God in a dateless past destroying the earth because of sin and then recreating it. So finally, point number 7, and this should be like just the finishing, icing on the cake, like killing the gap theory. There should be no talk of like there can be no possible way the gap theory can be existing. Look at Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. This is, to me, is the nail in the coffin. Now, guys, there's a lot more. I just did 7 points. What's his name? Who's out in the guy that's out, not in Pensacola, Tab. What's his first name? Harold Tab. Has a great book, a small pamphlet. You could read it if you're interested in all the details about marriage being from the beginning and how that couldn't be because angels don't get married. I mean, he goes into everything debunking the gap theory. He's got a great little book on it. You could probably get it if you look him up. I don't even know where you go to get it. But it's a very big topic. I just did 7 quick points showing why the gap theory is false. Look at Exodus chapter 20, verse 11. This is the one that kind of nailed it for me, and I said case closed, no need to further look into it. It says, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth. What did we read in Genesis 1:1? You guys got it memorized. In the beginning? So, including verse 1, including the heaven and the earth, it says, in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. When was the sea made? 3. Verse 3. Yeah, up here. On day 3. So it includes Genesis 1:1. It includes the 3rd day as well. It says he made the sea and all that in them is. Let me also paste. And rested the 7th day, wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. So case closed, guys. In 6 days, he made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is. Meaning he didn't make it, destroy it, and recreate it. He literally did it in 6 literal days. And we're going to talk about, how do you know that those were literal days? 1 day is 1,000 years. 1,000 years is 1 day. Maybe it took him 7,000 years to do that. And we're going to look at why that can't be. So that's kind of the thing on the gap theory. Let's go back to Genesis 1 and keep reading. And yes, I know I took a bulk of that just to kind of go over that, but I know the gap theory will come up because it's unavoidable. If anybody's ever heard of it, that's usually all the questions we have. So if you guys still have something to add to that, we'll talk about it on a Friday night sometime. So we have that the earth was without form and void. Verse 2, darkness was upon the face of the deep meaning the waters. Why do we know that? Because keep reading. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So what is the deep? It's the waters. It's the oceans. It's the deep, okay? But remember, it's kind of like not the deep that we think of, where bodies of water are everywhere. They were just kind of like this big, huge body of water, because that's all that we could see. There was dry land in there, but it was underneath. It was just the deep, like a big, big, huge body of water. Okay, verse 3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. So God literally spoke the light into existence. Verse 4, and God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. Now, where did God get the light from? Where's the light? Where'd the light come from? Himself. Yeah, it just was, right? I don't believe God, didn't possess any light before, but as far as how it concerns to us, there was just light. It can't be the sun, because the sun was only created on day 4. We're going to look at that. So literally, God just created light and darkness. How do we tell time, right? How do we tell it by evening and morning, right? We tell it by light and darkness. I believe that God was literally instituting time for the first time ever. God doesn't operate in our realm of time. He exists outside of time. Otherwise, if he was bound by time, he wouldn't be God. Time would be God, because it rules over him. So time rules over us, but God is not bound by time. When eternity happens, time is irrelevant. What does it matter if you say 1,000,000 years, 2,000 years? It's irrelevant. It's eternity. It goes on forever. It has no beginning. God has no beginning. He has no end. And I know in our mind that's unfathomable, because we know that things have to have a start and a finish line, but God, there is no start, there is no finish. So when he created light and darkness, God is literally ruling over that time. And in it, he's about to put something else in charge of that time, and we're going to see. So we see that the deep is the sea or waters. Hang on. My iPad just went. There we go. God creates time. Look at, where verse did I leave off here? Verse 6? No, verse 5. And he called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So right off the bat, we kind of debunked the idea of it actually being one day being 1,000 years. Now remember, the Bible says one day is as 1,000 years to the Lord. Meaning, what does that mean? It doesn't matter. Guys, all he showed, we sometimes, yes, when the Bible could be taken literally, take it literally. But if I say lift up your voice as a trumpet, and am I literally wanting you to go burr, 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 or am I just saying just be loud like a trumpet? So if it says one day is as 1,000 years to the Lord and 1,000 years is as one day, it just means time's irrelevant to him. That's all he's trying to say. It doesn't mean it's meaningless. It doesn't matter. So we don't have to take that so literally, and we can see that the evening and the morning were the first day. And when the Hebrews, when they celebrate their Passover, their feasts, their holy days, their days go from that evening at 6 o'clock all the way to the next day. And to them, the evening and morning is one day. For us, it's the morning and evening is one day. So it's kind of flip-flopped. Okay? So look at verse, we're going to jump right into the firmament. It says in verse 6, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. The question is, what is the firmament? This is a $6 billion question. Regardless of what, let me give you both kind of theories. There's more than two, but let's just focus on two. That verse in verse 8 says, and God called the firmament heaven. So a lot of people will just say, well, it just simply means the expanse, right? That the openness, that's what the heavens are. Birds fly in the heavens. We don't literally mean the birds fly up where Jesus is. We mean just the birds fly in open expanse. But firmament denotes a word that's more than that. The etymology of the word, even the word firm, has something solid connected to it. When you study in Hebrew, because the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, the New Testament was written in Greek or Aramaic. And when you study that word, firmament, and by the way, I think it was a perfect translation. It was a perfect word to use. The ESV, for instance, uses the word expanse, meaning just an open space. And that is included in the firmament. That is where birds fly. The birds obviously don't fly in somewhere solid, right? But firmament means more than just an expanse of space. There's something solid being in it. If I tell you about the money is in the vault of the bank, do I literally mean it's actually in the metal, it's in the walls, or do I mean it's in the open space once you walk inside that vault? Because what the Hebrews believed, there was two definitions they had for it. One is hakaya, which means to be beaten out. Okay, something that like when you beat out a metal plate, like when they like actually fashion it, that's what it means. Or to be spread out thinly when you beat something out. And then the other part would be, where did I have it written? Shamayim, which means heaven. So it's both. It's hakaya and it's shamayim, which is like something that's an expanse, but with something solid finishing it. And we're going to look at that solid part of it and what the Bible's talking about. But the Hebrews believed it was a solid expanse as if beaten out, or it was called the vault of heaven, literally the vault of heaven. You know, meaning that there's a place where the birds fly, but there's a stopping point somewhere. So let's kind of look at some of these things about the firmament. Bradley, if you would go to Job 37, verse 18. Harley, if you would go to Revelation chapter 15, verse 2. Caleb, if you would go to Revelation chapter 4, verse 6. And then Bradley, when you get there, the rest of us, let's go to, actually, Danny, if you would go to Psalm 148, verse 4.
All right, Job 37:18 says, "Hast thou with him spread out the sky, which is strong, and as a molten looking glass?"
Did you guys hear that? That's how them spreadeth out the sky to spread out thinly. Didn't we say that's what the word means, to spread out thinly? And as what? Read the rest of that verse.
Which is strong and as a molten looking glass.
Which is strong and as a molten looking glass. You guys ever seen like a snow globe? Okay? Everything exists within the snow globe. It's not actually in the glass part, but there is a stopping point. There's something firm to that, right? Harley, read the next verse in Revelation chapter, what did I tell you? 15:2. Read that.
And I saw as it were a sea of glass mingled with fire, and them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stained on the sea of glass, having the hearts of God.
Okay, so we have people. This is up in heaven. This is the book of Revelation. This is future tense. There are people standing. This is beneath a throne, and they're standing on a sea of glass. Number one, we know it's not a literal ocean because they're standing on it. And it's called a sea of glass exactly as Bradley described in the book of Job. What is the sea of glass they're standing on that's beneath the throne? Look at, who did I have read? I think it was Caleb, Revelation 4:6. Let's look a little bit more at this sea of glass.
And before the throne there was a sea of glass like unto crystal, and in the midst of the throne and round about the throne were four beasts full of eyes before and behind.
So underneath heaven, beneath that throne, there's a sea of glass, and it's like unto crystal. You ever seen crystal? You can see through it, right? It's almost like just like a window almost. The Bible talks about the windows of heaven, right? So before that, I don't know whatever you think of outer space, shape of the earth, flat, round, triangle, whatever you think. Here's what's very clear. Something up there is solid, and it's like a sea of glass, okay? And whatever we are beneath this firmament, okay? Now look at, I think I had Danny, was it? Read Psalm 148, verse 4.
Praise him, ye heavens of heavens, and ye waters that be above the heavens.
Okay, so above this, we know there's a sea of glass there, but there's actually literal waters, right? There's waters above the heavens because it's separated the waters from the waters. So there's waters, the Bible talks about a river of life. You know, the Bible talks about, there's definitely waters and bodies of water in heaven. And these waters are separated by two things, by something solid and by an expanse. And all of that is the firmament, okay? Does that make sense? So picture just there being water, right? There's heaven and earth, there's water. God says, no, I'm going to use an entire day, because he used the entire day of day 2 to go and then separate it. And waters exist above it, and the waters we now know as the sea exist below it. Does that make sense? Look at, we'll all turn there. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22. Isaiah chapter 40, look at verse 22. It says, "It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers." So who sits above the circle of the earth? Which, by the way, whether you think whatever it is, it's a circle. So whether you think it's flat, it's a flat circle. And if you think it's a globe, it's still a circle. So it doesn't really matter. It's a circle. All right, so there goes the triangles theories and the whatever, if you think it's a rectangle or whatever. And the person above it looks down, and the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers. When you guys walk in a field and you're looking at the ants and the grasshoppers and everything, to them, you are colossal, right? Like, you are a big deal. And they are nothing. They're powerless. Like, compared to you, they're nothing. That is how, like, and I'm not saying God looks at us as nothing, because obviously we're the apple of his eye. Like, he values us as a great treasure. But that is kind of the ratio here and how it's being looked upon. So there's grasshoppers that stretcheth out the heavens as a curtain, and spreadeth out them as a tent to dwell in. Now think about this concept, that he spreads out the heavens as a tent to dwell in. And there's a verse in Genesis, we're going to get to it, that the birds fly in the open firmament of heaven. Getting more specific about the firmament, that there's an open part and a closed part. Okay? And he says that the birds fly in the open firmament of heaven. If I tell you, listen, there's a bird in that tent, he's flying around in the tent, are you literally going to look in the fabric to find the bird? Or is it meaning he's flying in the open expanse of it? Yet there was something like a curtain, like a tent, that is covering that. Okay? So I think we kind of beat the dead horse. And by the way, I think it was Bradley read it about crystal. Who read it about the crystal verse? The sea of glass was like crystal. Caleb did. Watch this. I'm going to read this for you. Don't turn there. Ezekiel 1:22 says, "And the likeness of the firmament upon the heads of the living creature." We were talking about creatures here, and it's describing these creatures. And it says, "The likeness of the firmament upon their heads," so on their heads they had a firmament, "was as the color of a terrible crystal stretched forth over their heads above." Does it literally mean there was just space above their heads and it's describing what it looked like and it was like crystal? That doesn't make any sense, right? So there's obviously something solid, and the likeness of it was like unto a terrible crystal. So I think it's very clear. Whatever the sea is, it's like crystal, it's a sea of glass, and it's above the heavens. Okay, so that is my thing on the firmament and why I don't believe it's just an expanse or just heaven. Let's go back to Genesis. So kind of keeping that in mind, now when you see that Bible, because you're going to see that word in the Bible many, many times, you'll kind of have a little bit about what the translators were trying to say when they said firmament, because to us that's archaic. It's not really a word we use today, but that's a word that meant two different things to them. Yes.
Last question, or you pressed?
No, go ahead.
So in Genesis 1, verse 6, and God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." So the way I try to understand things is how it was before. So I understand what you're saying. I'm a little confused on what it was like before all that. So is it just as plain as that he divided water?
No, yeah, it says what it was like in verse 2.
Okay.
The earth was without form. So there was no form to the earth, and void. And darkness was upon the face of the deep. It's literally just water.
Okay.
What did it look like before? Whatever you think the earth looked like, just imagine it all being water.
So when he introduced the firmament, the main thing was to divide water.
Yeah, it's as if I have water and pretend this bottle's the firmament.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it is dividing, and this was sitting in maybe a bathtub. Imagine this is a bathtub. Mm-hmm. This is dividing that which is below in the water from the water which is above the water. And you also have an expanse. So imagine him going, creating this solid whatever that shape is, like he's creating something solid. And then you have heaven with water up here, and you have earth and water down here.
Okay.
So I don't know an exact thing of what it looked like, but we do know it was without form and void, and it was just water. Okay. Let's look at verse 9. "And God said, Let the waters under heaven be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so." So what he did is he gathers the waters. Now we have this just conglomeration of water. He brings all the waters together. He makes the dry land appear. You got texture now. You've got mountains. You've got prairies. You've got all this texture, and it comes up, right? It appeared. It doesn't mean it wasn't there and he created it from scratch. It was under that deep, and now it appears, okay? The Bible talks about in 1 Peter, the earth standing in the water and out of the water. You think of a boat, part of it's beneath the water, part of it's above the water. Okay, that's basically all it was. For dry land, part of that land is very much below the water, and part of the land is above the water, but now it appears. Look at verse 11. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, and the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. When fruit trees, the cool thing about fruit trees, you ever pick fruit off of them? The seed to make more is within the fruit. That's so cool. So God created these things with the seeds already in it. And by the way, when he created it, it wasn't in its infancy state. It already had fruit and it already had seed in the fruit. Okay? It already had these seeds in there. So the Bible, how old the earth was when he created it, I don't know, but he created it with age. Could have been millions of years. Could have been billions. Could have been hundreds, thousands. I don't know. But it had age. These were already full-grown things. The mountains were full-grown. The trees were full-grown. Okay? So the verse 13, and the evening and the morning were the third day. Verse 14, and God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night. So before you had this kind of formless void, right? And he says light and darkness. Okay? Now that there's separation, there's an expanse, there's openness. In that openness, he puts two things. Look at what he says. God said, let there be lights in the firmament of heaven, divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, for seasons, for days, and for years. What is the purpose of the lights that he puts in there? The sun, the moon, the stars. They're for signs, they're for seasons, they're for days, they're for years. What is that telling you? They're for us. This thing of there's billions and billions of galaxies, it has no bearing on us, I don't buy it. Reason for it is they're not for signs, they're not for seasons, those aren't for days, those aren't for years. Okay? So everything that was created out there in the galaxies are for us. Okay? So that was the purpose of making them. Look at verse 15. Let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth. Again, noticing this is for us. Okay, this is for planet Earth. And God made two great lights. The greater light to rule the day. What do we know as the greater light? Which one's that? The sun, right. And the lesser light to rule the night. What would we say is the lesser light? The moon, exactly. And he made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of heaven. Now, we don't believe that they're actually inside glass, okay? But they're inside that open expanse, which past the open expanse is glass. And he set them in the firmament to give light onto the earth, and to rule over the day, and to rule over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. So in the beginning, God creates this light and darkness, okay? He's the one ruling over it. Now he's like, I'm putting you guys in charge. Now, obviously, God still rules over the lights, but they govern themselves. They kind of go around, and they go up in the morning, and they go down at night, and it gives us time, and it has a way for us to have signs. Many times in the Bible, one of our questions is, give us some example of signs. I'll give you one. The star that rested over Jesus when he was born was a sign that the Messiah is here. There are many, the moon turning to blood was a sign of something. There are many examples of astrology being signs, seasons, days, years, and it meaning something for us. God put them there to communicate with us. Okay, they were put there for a reason, not just for decoration, though they are beautiful decoration. So, look at verse 20. We're almost done. We're going to plow through that. Actually, we're not going to plow through this because we're going to hit some roadblocks here. So we'll probably have to pick this up, but let's look at verse 20. It says, and God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that they may fly in the open firmament of heaven. Check this out. Okay, I'm not an evolutionist by any stretch, but in evolution we learned that, the amoeba comes from the water, and then it turns into like a little frog or whatever. It turns into something else, and it just evolves into something. Part of that is actually true. Look at what the verse says. The life actually came from waters. It says, and God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life. So they came out of the water. They came out of the sea. And fowl that they may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. The birds came from water. I don't know. But the birds came out of the water. That's where it says the waters brought forth abundantly the birds. And God created great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind. and every winged fowl, the birds, that's what a fowl is, and God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the sea. Notice the word fill, because in a second you're going to see the word replenish. Everyone says, replenish. That means to fill again. That means one day there used to be this pre-Adamic earth, and now God's wanting to fill again. Well, not really, because when you look up, the Bible was translated in the 1600s, 1611 to be exact, and that word, when you look it up in the dictionary, replenish, it simply meant to fill. And when the Bible uses this word here, it's interchangeable with the word fill. So when he says, be fruitful, multiply, he's not using the word replenish here, he's using the word fill, and the two meant the same. So replenish doesn't necessarily always mean to fill again. It just simply meant to fill, like it does in this verse. And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. So let's kind of stop there. There's some other things we're going to get into. We're going to get into the rest of creation here. We're going to get into let us make man in our image. And we're going to see what God's image is like. What does God look like? That's what we want to know. I want to know what he looks like. I want to see what he looks like. We're going to talk about that in the next time. We'll kind of break Genesis 1 into two parts. But I promise you, we are not taking every chapter. Okay, I promise you, I'm not swearing or vowing. I'm just saying we're going to do it.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I probably shouldn't even have said that. But we're just going to we're going to try the best we can to keep it to one session. But Genesis 1, it's the creation of all that is living. So forgive me if I take two parts on Genesis chapter 1. But we'll pick it up probably in 2 weeks. No meeting on Friday night. And we're going to go in and get ready for service. We got 10 minutes before service, so I think that'll be a good time to unplug.